did Lizzo just unintentionally rebuke identity politics? I'm here with Young America's Foundation's spokesman, Spencer Brown, who wrote an article about this for the Federalist. Spencer, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Lizzo said and why it actually undermines the ideology of identity politics that she herself promotes in our pop culture?
Well, yeah, it actually kind of just caught me off guard. I was scrolling through Instagram and saw a Netflix ad for the new David Letterman show that they have. They just dropped a new season.
Right.
My next guest, Lizzo, was one of those guests. And in the audio clip that they cut for this promo, she's talking about how she doesn't want to be an activist just because she's fat and black. And so just that sentence in the subtitle caught my attention. So I thought, let's take a look at this. So I watched that clip and then watched the interview. And it's really interesting that she is sort of keying in on the way the world views her. And it's through this lens of intersectionality, which is something that has grown, greatly out of control, but is not a new idea. But what she hits on is this fact that people don't see her as Lizzo, the individual, for her career or her success. They see all of that through the lens of her size and her race.
Yeah, so this is very interesting because I think a lot of times people on the left undermine the argument for identity politics because they don't like the outcome of the argument, which oftentimes actually is reductive and can veer into racism. And one thing that I like about Spencer's piece is that he provides a really fair description of what intersectionality is. It's actually misunderstood a lot. But as Spencer notes, it was debuted by Kimberly Crenshaw in the 80s to say that people in the legal system aren't women, and especially non-white women are not treated equitably in the racial system or in the justice system because it doesn't take into account their racial identity, their sexual identity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But this gets the outcome of this, the logical outcome of this is very reductive. And isn't that really what Lizzo is grappling with?
Well, completely. And the way that intersectionality kind of piles up is it's not just you're black and you're a woman and you are fat, as Lizzo described herself. It's that all of those things pile on top of each other. And so it just adds all these labels and divides everyone. As I point out, it just kind of carves up society until all you're left with is your labels. And so that's how everybody views Lizzo. And so again, like you said, the left will often point this out, and Lizzo's done it herself. She's had a lot of conversations on podcasts and things about intersectionality and is not somebody who's shied away from talking about those sort of labels that she has in this theory of intersectionality. But then whenever all you talk about is how you're a victim because you're fat, black, you're a woman, of course that's how everybody sees it. Whenever she performs, it's not a good song, it's a good song for somebody who's fat. It's not success for a female artist, it's success for a female artist who's also black. And so it actually minimizes and takes away the individual contributions that are unique, very unique to Lizzo in this case, and makes them, again, just sort of the sum of her labels, rather than the fact that this is, again, she's an incredibly successful artist. She's won Grammys, she's worth $10 million. This is not somebody who you can look at and say, here's a victim. But because that's how intersectionality views everybody through this matrix of oppression, she then ends up with all these labels on top of her, and she can't really get out from under that to be just Lizzo, the individual.
And I wonder why that's the case, because if you aren't super familiar with Lizzo, she makes her identity a really central part of her persona as an artist, or part of her. So she makes all of these different sort of conceptions of identity, being fat, being black, being a woman. She's very much tries to own her weight, and there's she does this very deliberately. It's very much part of her activism as an artist. She's proud about it, she jokes about it, and her goal is to sort of normalize it and help other people feel better about their bodies, body positivity. But it was just really kind of striking to hear her complain to Letterman about how she's being reduced to a fat black artist when she has actually made a very concerted effort to be known as a fat black artist. And I think what she's struggling with is, she's struggling with the fact that that's reductive. Don't you think? And
yeah.
I don't want to be repetitive here, but it is just it's hard to wrap your mind around, because there are merits to saying, you broke down barriers for women, you broke down barriers for black women. Of course, those are barriers that are often important to break down, and it's an achievement to do it. But when you emphasize identity so much, your art does become known as a product of your identity categories, not of your aggregate, your holistic identity as a human being.
Well, and that was one of the things I kind of struggled with after I saw, again, when I was scrolling and saw that quote, I want to be an activist, not just because I'm fat and black. My first thought was, okay, well, that's kind of who you've made yourself out to be. She's, it's funny for, my second thought was basically, why are you complaining about this? You have leaned into this very hard.
Yeah.
You embrace this. Your backup dancers are called the big girls with like 4 R's or something in there. I don't even know how they spell it. But this is not something that she's sort of shied away from talking about or emphasizing in her performances, especially where she often talks about, big girls can dance too. She often, it doesn't matter, but she often emphasizes the size of her backup dancers and her own size. And she has all these songs about fitness.
Literally, there's a song called Fitness where she's in like obviously extremely tight outfits that accentuate her overweight figure. Yeah. And that's very purposefully making a point.
Right. You sort of have two different ways of handling that. I mean, like Adele is somebody who has always dressed very modestly and always, doesn't show off anything really, before she had her weight loss journey or whatever happened there. But she's somebody who never really talked about that. And so I think you can look at at Adele and see they didn't talk about her as necessarily like this body positivity icon because she wasn't out there talking about it, singing about it, taking photos, doing all that stuff with it. So Adele is somebody who didn't lean into her body size as any part of her career. Lizzo is somebody who has sort of almost exclusively leaned into that. And so, again, her complaining that people think she's an activist because she's black and fat is part of her own doing. But as I pointed out in the piece, there's also something to be said for the idea that she is just comfortable with who she is and she doesn't feel the need to hide anything, to cover up anything. She doesn't feel the need to talk about things in a way that's comfortable or, doesn't make other people uncomfortable. And the fact that she's comfortable perhaps with herself isn't a reason for her to be reduced, again, down to those just 2 labels of fat and black. She still is somebody who's contributed obviously quite a bit to whether it be TikTok culture or to music culture, festival culture, all of this stuff. Even fitness culture, I guess, potentially. But I mean, it's one of those things where it's not been without the dangers. She was fat shamed by Jillian Michaels and has even recently, she's again sort of in this leaning in thing. She's recently started a movement against the term body positivity and instead moving, this is a subject for another op-ed, I suppose, but is talking about normality, body normality instead of body positivity. I could not tell you the difference.
There's too many new words. I'm not capable of keeping track of all of the new terminology. I mean, there's 2 parts of this conversation, and we can veer into, and I don't think we should because I'm not interested in weighing in on it, and no pun intended.
Weighing in, very good.
But it sort of gets to Joan Rivers talking about Lena Dunham to Howard Stern when he was like, well, why don't you love Lena Dunham? She's hilarious, and like you're lewd, and she's breaking down these norms for women. And Joan Rivers was like, well, you don't want to encourage somebody to be unhealthy, and you don't want to encourage somebody to put their health at risk, and you don't want to normalize that. This is an entirely different conversation, but back to what Lizzo was saying in terms of identity politics, it's one thing to, I think Adele is a really instructive and smart comparison, right? Like it's one thing to be somebody who is a woman and might be overweight, but to just kind of sing. It's another thing to make a very purposeful effort to emphasize that you are somebody who's great at singing and you're kind of this embodiment of intersectional struggles. Yeah. And I remember one thing Spencer hasn't admitted yet. I shouldn't say admitted, but Spencer and I, we've seen Lizzo a couple times.
Twice at least. Okay. Twice.
Yeah, I think we've seen her twice, and both times
as an opener before anybody knew who Lizzo was.
She opened for Haim on their last tour, and I remember when we saw her first in DC, she was she was not well known at all. No. And one of the interesting things about Lizzo was that a lot of her music got popular years after it had come out, like Truth Hurts, and had been out for a very long time before.
A lot of sleeper hits, like 2 years after they're released, all of a sudden they pop up on the Hot 100 chart.
Right, and that's thanks to TikTok, and that's sort of a different conversation about how there's this democratization of the charts. But nobody really knew who she was, and she shouted about intersectionality on the stage. I very much remember her specifically going out of her way during her performance to talk about intersectionality, and this is where that led. And I think she doesn't like it, right?
No.
Like she doesn't like her own.
Nobody likes what intersectionality brings. When like a lot of things on the left, it sounds good. It can make you feel good to talk about standing up for the oppressed, and, holding the privileged accountable. She uses that binary all the time when she's talking about these things. But then again, in the end, here she is looking at sort of how her career has developed, and in a way, I guess probably you could refer to it as exploding again with TikTok and everything. She's just this icon now.
Meteoric, yeah.
Oh, completely. Yeah. And so now she's looking at that and realizing that, as she points out in the promo video and in the interview with Letterman, that she wants to be an activist because she has good ideas, because people like her music. She wants, again, it's all about her individual contributions instead of those labels that people have put on her. And so while she is potentially as much at fault for this perception of her as, the mainstreaming of intersectionality within our culture is, it's also just interesting that she would note that, again, completely inadvertently. She's not out there now all of a sudden claiming to be some reformed person who's standing athwart intersectionality, yelling stop, but she is somebody who's noticed this problem with it and sort of without realizing it has made a conservative point.
She's an argument against everything that she stands for. And to that, I would say, Lizzo, truth hurts.
Oh, wow.
Oh, it's so bad.
That's bad.
Spencer Brown, spokesman for Young America's Foundation. You can follow him on Twitter at It's Spencer Brown. We'll be back with more. Thanks so much for tuning in.